It's a great pleasure to be here today as part of this Keele Impact Showcase. What better way to showcase impact than to hear from the KBS researcher at the centre of the case study and from the organisation who benefited. So let me first introduce Kim Mather. Kim is an honorary research fellow at KBS. During most of the period about which we're going to talk, Kim was a lecturer, then a senior lecturer in human resources management at Keele. She was course director for all part-time MA industrial relations human resource management programs while at Keele, as well as been senior tutor for several years. Her research interests focus on public sector employment relations, developments in labour management and labour processes of public sector workers, the changing nature of professional work, trust in the sphere of human relations, all of which are relevant here. She's undertaken several commissioned research projects for the NHS Pay Review Body, for example, and for Staffordshire Fire Rescue Service. It's the latter that provides us with a context for today. Welcome, Kim.
Hello, Paul. Hello, Becky.
Secondly, let me introduce Rebecca Bryant. Becky was appointed Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive with Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service in April 2016, and is the first woman CFO to have progressed through the ranks in the UK. Becky joined Staffordshire in 2005 after serving with both Cheshire and Bedfordshire and Luton. During her career, Becky has worked at fire stations within the learning and development arena and as a flexi duty officer. In her role as strategic manager, her current responsibilities include providing the strategic leadership for the service, undertaking goal command and professional advisor to the Staffordshire Commissioner. Becky was awarded the Queen's Fire Service Medal in 2020 for her services to the fire and rescue sector. I'd like to thank both Becky and Kim for being here today to tell us about it. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Jewick. I'm Professor of Sustainability and Innovation at KBS. I'm pretty new to KBS, having started only last May, but it seems like yesterday. I'm coming into the office for the first time, in fact, next week. My role in this has very much been in the background, helping to write and pack a study. And my role today, which I'm quite excited about, is really one of a chat show host. My job is to put some questions to Kim and Becky, so you get a first-hand account from both sides of the impact. We wanted the session to be like a chat. Becky and Kim, as you've heard, know each other well, so we've not rehearsed it. Kim and Becky are going to shoot from the hip. So, if you're all sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. Kim, first of all, tell us a little bit about the roots of the impact case study. Let us know about your PhD and before, if relevant, and then your postdoctoral research interests, early outputs, and take us up to your position as being Keele Programme Director of the MA.
Okay, well, I'll try not to bore you with all the personal detail, but there is a kind of element of personal journey to it. I started my PhD part-time basis, actually at Keele, having completed my MA in industrial relations part-time, also at Keele. Great passion for the subject. The subject of my PhD was an examination of changes in labour management and labour process in the further education sector. Again, a sector close to my heart because I had spent some years teaching in FE and was closely involved and experienced significant and rapid change. So it was an academic interest in something that was very personal. So I did my PhD across 3 FE colleges and was able to explore, illuminate these really rapid, significant and actually largely negative changes for staff working close to students in FE. And I put that within the analytical framework of labour process theory that offered a way of understanding why external pressures impact so closely on internal management activity, and importantly, the way in which those sorts of management interventions are enacted do have profound consequences and outcomes for the staff. So I successfully completed my PhD, and from that produced a couple of papers in journals, which interestingly were picked up immediately. Well, one was by the Guardian newspaper and TES to highlight that actually there were very negative consequences from the way in which arguably necessary changes were taking place. So that was very much a sort of personal story. I then went back to, I was teaching in HE at a different institution by that point, but I was, I did an early research, I got an award for an early research, a postdoc award, to go back to FE a couple of years later to find out what was happening, what was changing. And what became apparent was that there was a great push for change management interventions, but very much, from my findings, driven by sort of a top-down, this is the culture we want, now you're going to have it. And of course that led to quite a lot of resistance and demoralisation amongst the staff, and that was of a concern to me. I broadened the scope of the research to look at what was happening across other public services. So in collaboration with Professor Worrell and Professor Carrie Cooper, we conducted an analysis of evidence, empirical evidence that was emerging across other public services, and there were commonalities in this sort of external budgetary pressure leading, and political pressure to some extent, leading to internal pressures on service managers that was sometimes ill-equipped to deal with the consequences of what was happening in these labour-intensive services. So we published a couple of book chapters. Am I okay for time? Because yeah, and so published a couple of papers out of book chapters and a paper out of that. And then I started to broaden the research to look at performance management in education, the rise of HRM, and how that was being driven, it seemed to me, by fairly kind of unitary normative models. I'm sorry, my telephone is ringing in the background, so we just have to ignore that. Can you hear me okay? And so that gave me the scope, I think, to start really thinking about how I could use what I was finding to inform and shape a far more nuanced approach to the teaching that I was doing. So it was very much a symbiotic relationship of me learning from the research and that informing the teaching, and then the people that were on the courses, particularly part-time courses, which I'll come on to in a moment, were able to feed back their experiences. So it's very difficult to disentangle the teaching from the research, my understanding of theoretical insights, and how I felt that I could hope to think through different ways of a more sort of nuanced approach to change management that would be more sustainable. So that's pretty well where I was at, and then became involved in emergency services research, and that was because I was getting increasingly frustrated by sort of political narrative around protecting frontline, very unhelpful frontline backroom debates that masked all sorts of issues. And I felt that the emergency services offered a very important lens through which to investigate the pressures on service managers and how that translates into the lived experiences of staff working and supporting in these services. And again, that was starting to inform a lot of what I was doing with the teaching. Alongside all of the research, obviously, as you've mentioned, Paul, I was the course director for the part-time HRM and industrial relations courses, which for me was absolutely fantastic because that had been the course that I had previously done myself. So it felt very much something that I felt that I could contribute to and develop and hopefully improve and add different things to. So that's pretty much it. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Thank you, Kim. That's excellent. That's given us a really good flavour of the roots of what was to come, and it's taken us up to the point at which enter stage left. We have Becky. Becky, perhaps you could tell us about what brought you to that programme of Kim's at Keele, and can you recall your early interactions with Kim, and what was it in particular that Kim was talking about that was resonating with you and the situation that you found yourself in at Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service?
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks for the opportunity to come and share some of our experiences with you all today. So I have been in the fire service for a very long time. And I can remember back to days of industrial action. Myself have stood on the picket line at times. You know, I've grown up in a very command and control sector that has trade unionism at its heart at all levels. We have a lot of trade unions in the fire and rescue service that we need to manage. So when I entered into a strategic management position, I went on a programme of development with another educational establishment. And when I finished it, one of the things that for me was completely missing from the programme was how to work effectively with trade unions and with staff associations. And so I did a little bit of research, and some people I knew had been to Keele and done the postgrad certificate. And that was what led me to Keele. I knew it was a gap in terms of my knowledge of how to get the best out of relationships with staff representatives. So I came up to Keele, enrolled on the programme, and I have some very vivid memories, you know, of the course. The one vivid memory that sticks in my mind was that I was the only manager on the programme. Every other person on it was a trade union representative, whether that had been a shop steward, whether it had been a branch official. I was the only manager on there. And I think the thing that I found was particularly fascinating, because the experiences that I was hearing about were not necessarily correlating with the experiences that I had in Staffordshire. So we've worked very hard in the service for a number of years to eliminate, as far as is reasonably practicable, this thought process that we do two people. We don't want to do two people. We want to work with our collective human resource, all at the time when I was on the programme, all 1,100 bits of brain power in order to resolve the challenges that we had. And that absolutely included our trade unions. But what I was not aware of until I'd done the programme is really the three perspectives, the historical elements that led trade union representatives to behave in the ways that they sometimes do. Because that wasn't what I was seeing in staffs. What I was seeing in staffs was the result of a number of years of hard work in creating relationships that tried to resolve issues right at the very beginning, rather than just implement something and then have a fight at the end of it, which is what was being seen in other parts of the country. So what the programme enabled me to do was to ask myself some questions about what was going on in service at the time. And then it was probably a couple of years after I'd completed the certificate that I then started to talk to Kim to say, right, well, we think we've had a model, it's really working well for us, but we need an independent view on it, because it'd be great. I can sit with my rose-tinted glasses and just say everything's fine in staffs, but actually, as an organisation with learning at its heart, as well as many other things, what is it that we can do better? How can we improve the experience for people coming into the workplace, which means that actually they feel valued, they contribute, they're empowered to work in a way that moves completely away from, I've got a higher status in the organisation than you, and you're going to do as I tell you, because that's not how we operate in staffs. But I needed some sense checking from an independent party to actually make sure that that was what we were experiencing, and it wasn't just my rose-tinted glasses. How's that, Paul? Does that take us up to your next question?
That's brilliant. Yes, because so then you asked Kim to come in to review the industrial relations processes at SFRS. Kim, can you tell us a little bit more about that research, what your findings were, and what the recommendations from that report were?
Sure. Well, first of all, it was, as Becky's just said, it was brilliant to be invited in to undertake, in her words, this critical evaluation, and she wanted to know what was going on and whether there were issues that she wasn't aware of. I had a fantastic period of actually undertaking research with the fire service, zipping around to stations, having lots of chocolate biscuits and coffee and what have you. I did quite a number of in-depth interviews. I did 7 focus groups with firefighters. The research was focused at that time on the firefighters whole time and retained, and not on the professional services staff. And the key findings were, I can completely endorse what Becky says, there really was a genuine commitment to consensual decision making, to genuine compromise, to bargained outcomes. What was particularly impressive was the commitment to having the union representatives actively involved in decision making at senior management level, so actively sitting on all decision making fora, being involved in meetings, and of course, as a consequence of that, being able to contribute to problem solving, to solutions before problems really surface. So bringing to bear the views and interests of firefighters into the decision-making process. And that was something that relied crucially on the commitment of Becky and her colleagues to recognising the value of trade union representatives, and also, I would argue, a very kind of enlightened and proactive approach on the part of the trade union representatives themselves, which isn't always the case. So over a period of time, it was quite clear that relationships between the representatives and the senior management team had become one based on trust and on seeking joint solutions, and that then led to outcomes that were credible and legitimate in the eyes of the firefighters themselves, which arguably is the key to a sustainable change intervention. So that was one key finding. Secondly, what kept coming across was generally it was this is a great place to work, and that in turn reflected a culture that was genuinely striving for openness, honesty, partnership, moving the service forward, acknowledging the pressures, but based firmly on sort of finding solutions rather than hitting out at whatever problems there were. One of the findings was that whilst that was absolutely fantastic at sort of senior levels, there was a little sort of stickiness at times lower down the organisation at sort of station, sometimes watch level, where possibly local managers that had been promoted perhaps didn't have the skills and understanding that Becky and her senior colleagues had, of the understanding of the importance of industrial relations, of the role of the trade union representatives, of the need for compromise, of an understanding of perspectives and their importance, of the validity of all alternate voices. So that was one of the key recommendations to the senior management team, that where there was scope and where it was operationally expedient, if there could be some kind of replication of these consultative structures further down the organisation, that could only enhance what was already an exemplary set of industrial relations. Another key finding really related to that was around perhaps the need for, appropriate staff development interventions to provide certainly middle managers the skills and industrial relations competence to be able to perform their role effectively in these very difficult areas, actually. So.
Thank you, Kim. Becky, could you pick up the story now? So Kim has done this report, she's made her recommendations. What happened next in SFRS?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Back in, it would have been about 2013, 2014 when Kim concluded the research, we were still under a governance structure that was made up of elected members from Stoke-on-Trent City Council and Staffordshire County Council. So they, in effect, are the people charged under legislation to deliver a fire and rescue service. So it's only right and proper that they're engaged with that work. So Kim came along and presented to one of those panels and presented in a way that was really accessible to those members. So these are individuals who, may have only been an elected politician for a short period of time, equally may have been for a very long time, some of who would have had experience of working with, within the industrial relations field, others who would not have any idea at all and would perhaps use experience of let me describe it as a more negative industrial relations arena than the one that we were promoting in service. So it was really important for me and for Peter, who was the chief at the time, that they didn't hear that from us, because, again, sitting there as part of that group of individuals, having an independent third party come in and say, look, I've done this work, I've critically evaluated, and this is what I found. So it was really important for those members to hear from Kim. So she originally came in and she spoke to our Strategy and Resources Committee, and it went from there through to our full fire authority meeting. And what I have to say is, the members were very pleased to hear what Kim had to say, but then of course they hold me to account to deliver against the recommendations that are within that report. So Kim mentioned two key areas, and I'll cover both of those. So the first one was around middle manager understanding of the world of industrial relations. And what tends to happen in the fire service is that as you move up within the career structure and you take on more responsibility, suddenly you find yourself having to negotiate and consult with trade unions, having had no development at all in that arena. And of course, what we know is it's not like working with staff. Our trade union reps are very well trained by the Fire Brigades Union. There's no doubt about that. And so what's really important, and what was really important, was that we made sure our managers had that same level playing field in which to go into those discussions. So we opened up access to the postgrad certificate for all of our middle managers. And I think, actually, Kim, all of them that were middle managers at the time came on it.
Yes.
We then also said, if you have an interest in this, we're not going to stop your development just having done, the 1 year postgrad course. They had the ability to go on to the masters, and we had two members of our group manager, that's our middle manager cohort, who came on and both completed a master's with Keele. And so they were then able to, at very early stages in their career, because they're relatively young in terms of their fire service tenure, they've now got that for the rest of their career to build on, which is fantastic. So we put in that middle manager programme. But actually, what we also recognised was that it can't just be about middle managers. Supervisory managers are dealing with health and safety officials, for example, on fire stations. They also need to have an understanding. So through Kim's team, she developed some bespoke programs, which we then delivered again through Kim. So completely independently from the service, she came along and gave them the opportunity to get a bit of a history, but then also have some experience. So immersed into doing some negotiation skill work, some consultation work. So it wasn't just about here's the theory on a board. It was the opportunity to actually apply it in practice, which has been a really important part for us as an organisation, because what we want to be able to do is to actually materialise the theoretical underpinnings into how it works in everyday work. So those were the sort of key areas for us in terms of those next steps. But of course, what Kim has mentioned is that this was just one element of our organisation. You know, we have a number of trade unions that also represent our Green Book staff. And so we wanted to make sure that what are we seeing replicated in those areas of our organisation as well? How are those staff feeling? Because at the time, the FBU was in effect a closed shop. So you could only join if you were a firefighter. Now, things have changed in the last couple of years. They don't Book members of staff, but they can certainly represent Green Book members of staff if they join the trade union. So what we wanted to understand from the point of view of Unison especially, what does it look like for those? But equally, one of the things that we had in place, and we still have in place on our senior management board, which is our top decision-making board, is a position for someone who is a non-trade union representative. Because, of course, we have members of staff who aren't members of trade unions. So how can we capture their voice in all of this as well? And so that's probably the point at which I'll hand back over to Kim, who'll probably talk about how did we do that additionality in terms of understanding that area of our organisation.
Thank you, Becky. Yes, you've seen that you've anticipated the next question that I was going to put to Kim, which was around the hidden involvement of the professional service staff, and how did you go about, Kim, evaluating that voice of the professional service staff, and again, what recommendations followed to SFRS?
Well, I mirrored a very similar methodology in that I did a range of in-depth interviews with service managers and with the Unison representative who, correct me if I'm wrong, Becky, I think she'd only recently taken on that position, having taken it over from a fairly inactive Unison representative, I seem to recall. So she was quite enthusiastic and keen to talk. And then I did, I think it's 5 focus groups, 3 with the support staff themselves, the professional services staff, and 2 with firefighters, 1 whole time, 1 retained. The importance of doing that was to assess the working relationships as between the firefighters themselves and the professional services staff, as well as the broader voice mechanisms. The key findings, actually, as Becky says, there were lots of opportunities for staff to access a range of mechanisms for being involved in decision making and to a greater extent getting to understand what's going on in the organisation. So the open chair at the senior management meeting I thought was quite an innovative way of doing this. Some staff thought this was fantastic. Other staff, support staff, I think lacked the confidence to be able to go and sit at a meeting of what they perceive to be senior managers. So there's this sense of, well, I'd like to go, but I'm not sure that I've got the confidence to express my views, or I'm not sure I'm important enough. And I think that's a perennial problem with staff in these sorts of roles that perceive that they are less important than they actually are. So that's a separate issue altogether. There were, again, what came across was fantastic place to work. There were some concerns around career progression, which are in a way a little bit more limited, but again, that is not unusual for the roles that I was looking at. Generally positive about staff development, but wanted more opportunities. So it's a very comprehensive report that I wrote, and the key recommendations that came out of it was to try to cultivate a greater understanding amongst the support staff of the importance of their voice, how much it's valued, and for the service to I think the phrase I used in the report was some kind of internal roadshow where the union representatives and perhaps senior managers actually go around and talk to staff and say, you have got these opportunities. We really value your contribution. It's important that your voice is heard. So there was that. Perhaps opportunities for staff development stroke career progression opportunities through shadowing and where operationally viable, secondment perhaps, involvement in the community, the community open days, which the support staff thought was fantastic when they'd been given the opportunity to do that. And trying to perhaps cultivate a more high-profile presence for the Unison representatives. They've got great facility support from the service, but at that point, it wasn't clear that the Unison representative structure was actually sufficiently embedded. So I think that was about it, Becky. I'm not sure there was anything else that I raised.
Thank you, Kim. And so did you see the benefits of that then, Becky, after Kim's recommendations?
Yeah, Paul, absolutely. So, you know, all the recommendations that came out of the first piece of research and the second piece of research gave us a really strong foundation on which to move things again into a better place as an organisation. I think one of the challenges, you know, that existed at the time was, and still exists to some extent today, were the external factors on the organisation. Yeah. So Kim's mentioned about her, you know, her research around how organisations react from an industrial relations perspective to external factors. So Kim came in not long after the last period of national strike action as a result of the pension changes. And I think what was good to hear back from Kim at the time was that staff actually understood this wasn't a fight within Staffordshire, and sometimes what we see, and I see it still around the country, is that people become very personally drawn into this rather than understanding they are a representative of an organisation, a trade union, a group of staff. And that unfortunately then gets in the way of being able to work collectively together to move things into a better space. And what the second piece of research allowed us to do, especially with Unison at the time, was to really help them understand that actually they had a huge contribution to make to the organisation in terms of their voice, but they needed some different support than some of our FBU reps because they didn't have quite the same level of access to training and development. And I don't just mean training and development from a trade union perspective. I also mean from the point of view of, you know, being able to sit with what's perceived as the upper echelons of an organisation and have a conversation. So one of the offshoots from that second piece of work, which we were already doing with the FBU, were regular closed door informal conversations with our professional service staff reps about stuff that's going on. So there's no surprises. So we're signed up as an organisation to the NJC protocol anyway, which is all about a no surprises culture between the organisation and trade union reps. And although that's specifically about the FBU, actually what we were able to do was really talk about how it was all across the board. It didn't matter which group of staff you were representing. The important thing was that we would talk to you about issues that were ongoing at the time. And I know I've already mentioned some of the staff development workshops, but actually when I then became the chief fire officer, what I felt was really important was that went a little bit further. So when trade union staff go on trade union development courses, it's very specific, and I completely understand that. The bit that they then miss, though, is the higher level strategic organisational context that they're now going to be operating in. So generally, our FBU officials especially, and I know I'm talking heavily about the FBU, that's the largest trade union membership that we have in the service, but they'll generally come from being on a fire station. They'd have had little exposure to politics, to budgets, to finance, to governance. And so one of was personal development sessions between myself as the chief and those reps if they wanted them. This wasn't a forced thing. This was, if you want to know more about then put an hour in the diary and we'll have a conversation about it. And more recently, with the election of some new brigade reps, you know, I've sat down with them on a one-to-one basis and gone through topics such as budget, politics, legislation. I mean, really dry subjects, unfortunately, but really important so that a trade union official understands the whole picture that they're dealing with, and not just this one piece over here, which at times can be driven by local agendas, individual rhetoric, and so on. So they're looking at the whole picture and not just one isolated little bit of the jigsaw.
Thank you, Kim. Becky. I think you've given us an insight into the wider value, actually, of Kim's reports. And Kim, you then went on and developed training for other fire services and delivered that as part of the Fire Service Executive Leadership Programme. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about that, and then how you then sort of took it even wider to contribute to the independent review of conditions for fire and rescue staff in England, which had been commissioned at the time by Penny Mordaunt, the Fire Minister, and that was called the Sir Adrian Thomas Review.
Well, picking up from what Becky just said, it was really interesting to hear Becky explain so eloquently about the need for trade union representatives to understand the broader pressures and the context and the different issues that frame the kind of behaviours that you really need to sustain a positive industrial relations climate, because in a way that drove the substantive content of what I developed for the Executive Leadership Programme. It was at Becky's invitation that I became involved in that programme, and I was grateful for the opportunity. So in terms of what I actually sought to address was to encourage the service managers, the participants that presumably were aspiring to senior positions in the fire service, to challenge perhaps some preconceived idea about the role of the unions, why unions behave the way they do, the potential for them to make a positive contribution, the need for appropriately developed participative structures to deliver on the kinds of sensitive changes and pressures that the service has to now accommodate. So in terms of content, it was really a sort of whistle-stop tour of perspectives, theoretical perspectives, getting them to think outside the box a bit, that whilst they might subscribe to a particular set of views, it doesn't make them the one set of views. Why we have trade unions, where did they come from? The broader sort of political context, the budgetary pressures, and how that surfaces then within these organisations. And then linked it to HRM and change management. I think the key strapline is that what always drove me was that over 70% of change management initiatives actually fail, and that's pretty well widely reported and researched, which is a concern. Those that are likely to be more successful move beyond the kind of normative unitary style solutions that are presented in some texts to a more nuanced, participative decision-making process. So that's in essence what I try to achieve. And actually, we had some fantastic discussions, and quite a number of the participants contacted me after the event, either to say they'd enjoyed it or could I have a chat with them about so and so, all very informal. Had a couple of visits to a couple of the fire services to do little sort of CPD events, etc. So they have been wonderful experiences too.
Thank you, Kim. Just before we move on to the Sir Adrian Thomas review, Becky, you just wanted to come in on that training.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, so I'm the course director on behalf of the National Fire Chiefs Council for the Executive Leadership Programme, and we wanted to move those sessions from just theory to practice. So as part of the immersive approach to that programme, at the very end in the final module, the cohort deal with a strategic issue that a fire and rescue service is facing. And part of that is to work and negotiate and discuss with trade union representatives. Now, the actors that come to play certain roles are actors, but when it actually comes to our trade union colleagues, we bring bona fide experienced trade union reps in. Now, of course, at the end of the day, or the 2 days, generally the cohort say to me, were they actors? Because they have experienced a different approach to trade union and to industrial relation conversations than that which they've experienced back in service. So Kim will know, I use my in-service trade union reps as development for those guys, but importantly to say, do you know what, folks? There is a different way other than just staring at each other across a table and thumping a desk, which unfortunately we still do see in a number of fire and rescue services across the UK. So I think it's important to understand that from Kim's theoretical input, we've been able to take it a stage further and actually give them the opportunity to put into practice the stuff that Kim had been talking about in theory. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Becky. In the interest of time, I'm just going to really sum up quite quickly what the wider contribution that Kim made, because you were able to contribute to this Sir Adrian Thomas review of the conditions for fire and rescue service staff in the UK, and use some of that experience of working with Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service to contribute to wider public policy debate. Yeah. But I'd like to sort of draw it all to a close now. Just in the interest of time, we could go on, we could talk for much longer, but I wonder, Becky, if you could just end by summing up for us the impact that Kim's work has had and continues to have for SRFS.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So those officers that I talked about who had that training a few years ago, they're now moving into senior management positions. So as we see the natural retirement profile, they're now going to be far more engaged with the trade unions, but they're building that on some great foundations. They've been working with them already, following on from that training and following on from project work, where we don't say the only people that can negotiate and consult are the senior officers. It has to be the people that are involved in the project, generally led by those middle managers. So they've continued to use their experience and their learning in that sense. Of course, what you find in the fire service is through that retirement profile, you then get new managers. And so the service are already working with Kim actually on the next iteration of bespoke development for our supervisory managers, which will be obviously about, industrial relations, but framing it around the use of the word trust, because that's where we want to be as an organisation. We want to be trusting. We don't want to be adversarial. We want to be in a win-win situation for everybody. So there's no doubt, Kim's work has had a big impact. It continues to have a big impact, and not just on Staffordshire. I think that's an important point, Paul. The fact that other fire and rescue services across the United Kingdom that send their officers onto the executive leadership programme and their support staff, they also get an insight into this world. And I've got no doubt that as we see a white paper coming out in the next couple of weeks about service reform, believe it or not, the last time those national mechanisms for negotiating were reviewed was by Frank Birchall in 1999, some 22 years ago, and here we are probably about to see the launch of another big review. So the work that Kim has done with others in the sector has also had an impact and will go on, I think, to do so, Paul.
Thank you very much, Becky. That's a very articulate way of drawing this together. I'd like to thank Kim and Becky for their work over the past back to 2013 and beyond, as Kim said earlier. But before sort of opening the floor to any questions that we might have, as I said earlier, my role here was to help to write this case study. It was a pleasure to work on it, and I just wanted to offer at a sort of a more abstract level just a few reflections on what I think made this an excellent case study. So first of all, I think you'll have picked up from the past 3/4 of an hour that This case has significance. So, as we've heard, there's a direct link between the underlying research from Kim and her colleagues on the one hand, and the impact that followed it in the form of changing practices, increasing participation and inclusivity, trust, improving understanding, and facilitating wider process change. Secondly, the case has reach. So the impact started small, but grew beyond the boundary of the organisation to different contexts. Thirdly, the case was timely. The underpinning research can be traced back to before the REF period, but the impact was very much in that REF period and continues going on as Becky has just referred to. I think fourthly, the case had momentum. There was a sequence of grants or research opportunities. The size of the grants, less important than the trajectory of the research and the impact that followed. And fifth, I think that the final fingerprint would be that the case was well documented. So across the period, the research, the impact has been captured in papers, other publications, presented at conferences and other events, captured in documents, internal documents to the fire service, and later in testimonials. So whilst this REF is behind us and the next REF seems far away, it's not too soon for us as a university to be thinking about what might be the next impact case studies for the next REF. As a university, we need to maintain oversight of those potential impact opportunities. We need to keep them under review. We need to be flexible to support researchers who are working on impact cases. So that might involve perhaps allowing people the bandwidth or maybe the discretionary funding to continue a trajectory of impact where there is that strong impact case emerging. So that's all from me. I'd like to thank once more Rebecca and Kim, and Jane, Chrissia, if you have any comments or reflections or questions for either Becky or Kim, I would welcome any comments that you have.
I'd be happy. Oh, I'd let Chrissia go first.
I didn't know the etiquette, so I thought. But
Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
Thanks so much, and thank you as well for agreeing to record this, because I think it's a fantastic journey, and I think that you can never write all of that into an impact case study, and it is really exceptional to hear it. And I guess one of my questions is there are so many different types of impacts, and I was wondering, because I obviously don't know the context quite so well as I know health, because that's my area of impact. But are there awards that could be you know, within the service that you could apply to with your union colleagues, that to actually to have recognition of the work and the practice, you know, that such high quality practice now that you're doing in the service? Because and often it's forgotten because you're so busy with the day job and everything else that's going. Nobody has time to think about, oh yes, let's get an award for being marvellous, you know. But you know, this is where the academics can help, because you know, if it's about, you know, how do you gather together the evidence, how do you put it into an application, that's absolutely the sort of thing that Keele, I know, would be really keen to support in, but may not know, you know, in terms of what would be valuable to you and your service. Because I think what you could ideally hope is, as you're saying, is that it then becomes embedded more widely across other services. And if it's kind of recognised within the service and outside, you know, through those sorts of awards, then people might come, so what is it? What are the ingredients? What do we need to do to have what you've got? And maybe that's happened already, and you've not sort of mentioned it in the presentation.
Yeah, so thanks, Christia. A really interesting question, because something like this is really quite difficult to capture on a piece of paper. So I guess the couple of areas where we absolutely have used it and it has been recognised, we used to have in the Fire and Rescue Service nationally a equality and diversity framework that you would be assessed against and you'd be given a rating. So we went for that a few years ago and got the highest rating, which was excellent. Interestingly, when they read our submission, they did say to us, we don't think you're really ready to put in for it. To which we said, why don't you just come and spend a couple of days with the Fire and Rescue Service? And then, of course, they came and spent a couple of days. They felt it, because that's what a lot of stuff is about.
Oh, we might have.
That would be one thing.
Oh,
I think you are right, Christia. We do feel that we're so busy we can't put ourselves in for anything. So I was really pleased that in 2018 we were awarded Emergency Service of the Year by a national through a national process from an organisation called Fire Magazine, and they're publishing. That was brilliant, and I was really pleased for the service, because an element of the submission was all around the culture and the industrial relations, so it was great to see that recognised. And then I guess the other area, and by no means there's more work to do on this, but we were subject and are now subject back to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies and now Fire and Rescue Service. We did have Her Majesty when I first joined. It went away and now it's come back again. And when they assessed us and inspected us as part of the first round, within a section that was to do with people, we were good across the board, 4 grades, good being number 3. But then in the specific area to do with people, we were awarded an outstanding for the way in which we run our culture, and the way that it isn't my culture, it isn't my DEP's culture, it's our culture as a service. But I do think that there's some more recognition, specifically around the industrial relations area itself, that I wouldn't know where to look at. And I'd be, really keen to talk to Kim, especially with this next piece of work that we're looking at doing, because that feels like it's triangulating the first 2 pieces of work into a third bit. So I think that's something we can talk about.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Becky. Yeah, the story continues, I guess. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I think we're actually sort of beyond our time. But if we think of 3 being as an appropriate time to shut the doors, Jane, have you got any reflections or questions or comments?
Yeah, just very quickly, I just wanted to thank you both for the presentation, and it's great to sort of hear about the impact of the industrial relations course, as well as the specific impact of your work, and sort of thinking how foundational that had been at Keele. And also, I just thought from the union perspective, when Rebecca was talking about the trade unions around the table, how Kim's work has impacted from the local to the national level, because often when you have trade union disputes, you might have a really good collegiate response around the table at the local level, but you can't make any moves because everything's decided at the national level. So I was sort of thinking at those early stages that might have been quite frustrating, but how important your narrative is to impact that now you're, impacting the national debate as well.
Thank you, Jane. Well, thank you all for joining us, Christia, Jane, because I thank you for setting this up and for helping us through those the gremlins that were in the system early on. We got there in the end. Thank you once again to Becky for your time, for Kim for joining us, and for all your hard work over the last 6 or 7 years. This is a good reflection of the work that you've done and how impactful it has been. And as we've music to our ears to hear how this work hasn't stopped and will go on. And so we'll keep a keen interest in how that goes forward as Kim continues in her position at Keele. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. That was really brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.